The Black education movement was an organisation of Black Britons, particularly West Indians, in the 1960s and 1970s, which existed to defend the welfare of Black children. This was in response to the institutionally racist education system that Black children would suffer under. At the time, the vast majority of Black people were West Indians, and the Black children were mostly second-generation immigrants of the Windrush generation. Welcome to Black British Hub, where I explore histories of the racialized peoples of Britain and the British Empire. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and keep notified. The Black education movement was a vital part of the Black British power period, and its formation was in response to a few things. The Council of the London Borough of Haringey published a report on March 31st, 1969, called Report to the Haringey Education Committee on Comprehensive Education, proposing a banding system across Haringey's comprehensive schools. In the school context, banding refers to the process of setting or streaming where students of similar academic ability are taught together. This is opposed to a setting where it's all mixed ability. Haringey's official reasoning was to maximize the performance ability of students and thought that banding was the best way to do so. However, Haringey residents were suspicious of frequent emphasis on the high proportion of immigrants within the borough. A can of worms opened when a report leaked shortly after this, explaining the true motives behind their banding. It was dated on January 13, 1969, and titled Haringey Comprehensive Schools, and was written by Alderman Alfred Doulton, the headmaster of Highgate School, a private school. A striking part of the report said, on a rough calculation, about half the immigrants will be West Indians at 7 of the 11 schools. The significance of this being the general recognition that their IQs work out below their English contemporaries. Thus, academic standards will be lower in schools where they're from a large group. This report became known in the West Indian community as the Doulton Report. This sparked an anti-banding campaign through demonstrations. The West Indian Standing Conference, WISC, and the North London West Indian Association, NLWIA, led the protests, acting as an intermediary between the police and the West Indian community. This led to the delaying of the proposals. During this delay, the campaigners printed copies of the council reports, created leaflets, and responded to the report debunking each paragraph. The campaign was successful as it had good media coverage, and the then Conservative-run Haringey Council postponed its plans. Ultimately, in the May 1970 council elections, they were defeated. Another thing that led to the downfall of the Haringey local government was the educationally subnormal schools. Now, this was more of a national issue, but Haringey was one of the many councils that were involved in this scandal. Parents who were unaware of the state education system were told that their children would be placed in quotation marks special schools, and parents believed that this would improve the education of their children. The West Indian community found out that these were actually ESN schools. The North London West Indian Association was very concerned with the high disproportion of West Indian children in ESN schools, calling them dustbin schools. They demanded a thorough investigation be made and that an investigative committee include psychologists, teachers, and other professional experts. The organisation also demanded for records of children that had been wrongly classified as subnormal be withdrawn, and all authorities in charge of these records should be informed of this decision. Evidence was gathered undercover in schools, gaining the trust of the staff, and they witnessed the way Black children were treated by the teachers. They indeed discovered a high number of Black children in ESN schools, and the association made a formal complaint to the Race Relations Board in January 1970 due to discrimination of Black children. The Race Relations Board concluded that Haringey Council violated areas of Section 2 of the Race Relations Act 1968. Like I said, this wasn't just a Haringey issue. The Inner London Education Authority reported in 1967 that 28% of children in ESN schools were from immigrant backgrounds. In 1973, it was confirmed to all local authorities that although immigrant children made up 2.4 of the population, 5.4% were in special schools, with West Indian children 4 times overrepresented in ESN schools. In Greater London, West Indian children made a quarter of all children in these schools. Professor Sally Tomlinson, a retired professor from Goldsmiths and an honorary research fellow in the Department of Education at Oxford, said that during the 1970s, she studied a group of children being referred to ESN schools. Black children were being moved out of mainstream schools faster than white or South Asian children. The head teachers of referring schools said that black children fit the ESN criteria of being slow learners and badly behaved. According to Tomlinson, they said that West Indian children were likely to be slow at learning, had poor concentration, spoke Creole dialect, were volatile, boisterous, extroverted and troublesome, and had family members and working mothers. They believed that these problems were genetically inherited, which coincides with scientific racism. They would also say things like, "It's such a transition for kids. One minute they are sitting under a baying tree, waiting for breakfast to fall on their heads. The next they are in a cold, wet place. West Indian children are boisterous and less keen on education than Asians. The black power people destroy kids, especially the less able," and saying that black children are violent. Tomlinson spoke to one black boy labelled as violent, but she had found out that he was almost totally deaf, something the school did not notice. From the late 1960s, supplementary schools were formed to combat the prejudice that black children were facing in mainstream schools. They were run by black voluntary teachers, community activists and parents. They were held part-time in addition to the children receiving state education, and these alternative schools were usually held in the evenings or on a Saturday. The main subjects included in these schools were maths, English, Pan-African history and culture and geography. In 1969, the George Padmore and Albertina Sylvester Black Supplementary Schools were established by John LaRose and other associates in the Finsbury Park area. John LaRose was a British Black Power activist born in Trinidad and was the founder and director of New Beacon Books, the longest-serving black bookshop in the UK, founded in 1966. Both schools formally registered in 1973. The George Padmore School was for older children and operated for 7 years, on Mondays, Fridays and Saturdays. The school initially started with 4 pupils, 2 of John LaRose's sons, 2 of their friends from Stationers Company School, a nearby grammar boys-turned-comprehensive boys' school that eventually shut down in 1983. George Padmore Supplementary School was located at 2 Albert Road in Finsbury Park. The classes were divided in 3 groups: students in their first year at secondary school, students in their second and third years at secondary school, and students in their 4th and 5th years at secondary school. The Albertina Sylvester School was for primary school children on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at 57 Victoria Road. Fees were £1 per term, although they were not fixed and parents contributed when they could. In July 1969, the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association, CECWA, was founded and became the main instrument in setting up the supplementary school network. It was the first specialist black education group in the UK. It became the body and focused on curricula, the provision of teachers, teaching materials, finance, the interaction between parents, teachers and students, and the black education movement's role in building community among black people in the UK. Waveney Bushell, the UK's first black female educational psychologist, was a founder of CECWA. She was from Georgetown, Guyana, and applied to the London County Council to become a teacher and was accepted. There she witnessed the education system in action and how black children were treated. She compared the Guyanese education system and the UK education system and was astonished at the differences. She explained that the former was built on repetition. For example, there was great emphasis for children to learn and repeat nursery rhymes and an ability to remember what was being told. However, in the latter, there was no reference to this at all. Therefore, this made a difference in performances in school and on tests. She talked about the testing system and said, "But from the moment I was exposed to tests, I realised our children wouldn't be able to cope with this. In the preschool days, education was centered around learning not how to abstract and relate what you have learned to the work you are doing, but just repeating what you heard. This began before school, with grandmothers, who were always the people who tested children in that way, started education at home using nursery rhymes. Education itself was really geared to that repetition of words. Our children, when they came here, found it was different. I'm sure they felt insecure when questions were asked of them which had never been asked before. Another thing that was concerning was the language barrier, as Bushell actually experienced when she went to study psychology at Bedford College, a girls' college. The college was very middle class, and there were only 2 black women there, which was herself and a Jamaican girl who was studying sociology. She became friends with her, as both felt very lonely. Her psychology class only had 14 girls, and she befriended 2 others, a Jewish girl and an English girl. Bushell got good marks on her essay, but one time in her second year, she had written an essay and remembered when her tutor told the class to be as critical as you want to be. Bushell received the essay back and said she had no marks. At the bottom of the essay, the tutor wrote, "Quote your references." She couldn't understand what the sentence meant. When she went to the tutor's room, he was very dismissive of her and said, "I just said, quote your references." Bushell replied, "I have. There's nothing else to quote." He dismissed her afterwards. Bushell added that she met politician Diane Abbott a few years back, and Abbott shared the same thing happened to her. The English language spoken in the West Indies was still behind in time compared to the English language in the UK, which is another reason why West Indian children did not flourish in the IQ tests. Bushell met with a group of parents who became community workers. They decided to go nationwide to address the issue in hand. Together they formed the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association. Noel Gordon, former ESN student, spoke of his treatment in these schools. This ESN school was a boarding school 15 miles away from where he lived. He was there for 10 years and left when he was 16, but was still unable to get a job because he couldn't spell, so he couldn't even fill a job application. A year before joining an ESN school, he was admitted to hospital after having a tooth removed. He was given an anesthetic, but it triggered a serious reaction because he had undiagnosed sickle cell anemia. Noel said that his health conditions led to the perception that he had learning disabilities, which was not the case. But because of this, it was recommended that he should be sent to a special school, despite no explanation of his disability given to his parents. In that same conversation, the school called Noel a dunce and also called him stupid. During his first night in the school, Noel, a 6-year-old, cried for his mother. He was also racially abused that first day, and the student hurled slurs at him was not punished. There was absolutely no curriculum in this school. Although he was given a book by a teacher, he was never taught basic grammar or how to spell. He did learn some basic addition and subtraction, but most of the time it was just crafts and games. It was only a year after that his parents realized what kind of school it was when Noel, now 7 years old, was punched by a 15-year-old boy. Noel's father visited the school for the first time. His father told the headmaster, "This is a school for handicapped children." Dated term, but he realized it was supposed to be a school for special needs. The headmaster replied, "Yeah, but we don't like to use that word. We call them slow learners." Noel's father was devastated, but felt very powerless in that situation to do anything about it. Educational campaigner Professor Gus John, who came from Grenada to the UK as a student, explained that many teachers confused race with intellectual ability, but black children were more likely to perform poorly in those IQ tests because those tests were culturally biased. As mentioned before, West Indian children did not understand the references and some of the words that were used in these tests. He added, if you grew up in a Jamaican household, you'd use Jamaican English, Patois or Creole. The problem most Caribbean students had was that because it was a derivative of Standard English, nobody believed that black students needed language support. Teachers did not try and understand the cultural barriers that West Indian children faced, and these assessments did not consider their domestic and socio-economic circumstances. On May 6, 1971, New Beacon Books published a 50-page book called How the West Indian Child is Made Education Subnormal in the British School System by Bernard Coard. Bernard Coard actually became the vice president of a revolutionary Grenada ruled by the socialist New Deal movement led by President Maurice Bishop that would make sweeping reforms to improve the country. But back then, when he had his book published, he was a school teacher and ran several youth organisations in South London. The book was groundbreaking as it was the first book to address institutional racism in the British education system, criticising the ESN schools. It was written for a black audience to make them fully aware of the state education system at hand. The book was first prepared as a paper that he presented at the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association conference early 1970. He received a positive response and completed the book that summer. Waveney Bushell, John LaRose, as well as other figures supported him through publicity and publication. 10,000 copies were printed by New Beacon Books. Publicity and sale was done through door-to-door within black communities by the association. A second edition was published in 1974. In 2005, Coard wrote for The Guardian on why he wrote the book. He came to Britain in September 1966 to do a master's degree at Sussex University. He completed it in the summer of 1967 and he started working full-time while signing up for a PhD in development economics part-time. In December 1970, he started running evening clubs for children who came from 7 ESN schools and also started working full-time at 2 other ESN schools. He discovered that the education system was using ESN schools as a dumping ground for black children who were anything but educationally subnormal. He was outraged but had no data and therefore no proof. To his surprise, in spring 1970, his cousin contacted him and placed an internal Inner London Education Authority report on all ESN schools under its jurisdiction into his hands. Her friend, who worked within the system, clearly had enough and sought to get someone to take this report with statistics and expose this scandal publicly. However, he was stuck on how to expose this scandal because he had no contact with the British media and he was not a member of any organisation, West Indian or British. One Saturday night, he went to a party thrown by 6 Grenadian friends of his in South London. At the party, there were West Indians of different nationalities. Many of them were living in Britain for many years and therefore had children in the school system. They had been hearing rumours about ESN schools and decided one by one to ask Coard about it. Coard explained what was happening and he was asked by multiple people at the party to prepare and present a paper at a conference which was to be held a few weeks later, where West Indian activists would be present. It was by accident that he found a way to make this internal report public. This was the conference organised by the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association. On the book's release day, Bernard Coard appeared on Primetime News in a discussion with the Chief Education Officer of the Inner London Education Authority, Ashley Bramall. He debated the facts outlined in the book with Bramall. Thanks to 3 Americans, the first 2 being Carol and Jim Bergman, giving him encouragement and also putting him in touch with the third who worked as a media consultant. She gave Coard a list of 1,400 newspapers and radio and TV programs and the names and addresses and phone numbers of all the key news journalists and columnists on each of them. She also taught him how to create and print proper press releases. Every single paper covered the story positively and presented the story accurately. He was invited to every talk show on the radio and TV and was interviewed by them. BBC then made a series of documentaries relevant to the issue of the education system of black children in British schools, and The Guardian sought permission and published the whole of Chapter 5 of the book on its editorial page. The spokespeople of the education system were also invited on radio and TV, denying everything and said that Coard's books were full of lies. But by the 3rd week of sustained publicity, they said that most of the book had truth, but there were many untruths. After 6 months, they were forced to admit that it was accurate and now it was recommended reading at teachers' colleges and schools of education across the country. Unfortunately, Coard's telephone was tapped. Him and his wife were sometimes followed by secret security personnel, and his 11-year-old nephew was harassed by police in a police car close to where they live and near their presence. But just around the same time the establishment stopped vilifying his book, the tapping and harassing also stopped. The Black Parents Movement was another organization of the Black education movement founded on April 20th, 1975. The Black Students Movement was also founded by local youths at the same time. Their foundation was due to the arrest of Cliff McDaniel, a black boy outside his school in Hornsey. He went to Stationers Company School and was stopped and searched by the police. He was also beaten up. He was charged for insulting behavior and assaulting a police officer, but he denied the charges. He was found guilty on both charges in Highgate Magistrates Court on June 26, 1975, and was ordered to pay £5 for 1 year on both charges. But both organisations campaigned against the verdict. An appeal was presented at Middlesex Crown Court on September 2, 1975, and the conviction was overturned. Moreover, the judge suggested that allegations of police violence should be investigated. A chief inspector was appointed by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to investigate, and witness statements and character references were submitted from the Black Parents Movement. Witnesses and parents were then interviewed on 7th and 14th January 1976, and was the first phase of the investigation considered to be complete. A case between Cliff McDaniel and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police took place from 3rd to 7th July 1978, but the case was dismissed and there is no record of any compensation received. McDaniel was known to the students and parents of the George Padmore Supplementary School. For this also triggered the foundation of the Black Students Movement, founded by Michael LaRose and Keith LaRose, to organise the defence of black youth who were over-targeted by the police. The Black Parents Movement was an extension of the Black education movement, and the Black Parents Movement continued to campaign against the racist ESN school system until it was finally abolished in 1980. Despite over 40 years since the ESN school system was abolished, institutionalized racism in the education system still exists. West Indian children are up to 6 times more likely to be excluded from schools than their white counterparts, whilst mixed-race children who are white and black Caribbean are 4 times more likely to be excluded than their white counterparts. The stats are even higher for Roma children, with them up to 9 times more likely to face exclusion. In the county of Gloucestershire in 2018 to 19, 12.4% of all black children faced exclusion, while this was the same for 2.4% of white children. Additionally, West Indian black pupils, including those of mixed heritage, are twice as likely to be identified as having a social, emotional, or mental health need as their white British peers. In the future, I will consider making a video about the British school to prison pipeline, because I think that is another interesting topic to touch on, since it also ties in with the institutionalized racism in education. In the meantime, thank you for watching this video and I hope you enjoyed it.